I'll let everybody in now. Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 4 of the Bioregional Conversations, a series of 7 conversations exploring the different ways in which bioregioning is taking shape around the world. It's great to see you all here. If you could just all please introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us which bioregion you're joining from, that would be great. As we're getting started, I just wanted to remind you that this session is being recorded and it will be live streamed on Bioregional TV. I'm going to pop a link in the chat in a second in case you want to share that live stream with any of your network. And then later this week, the edited video of this session will be made available, and that will be on our website. I'll also pop the link to our website in the chat for you all. So before I hand over to our host today, I just want to take the opportunity to remind you all that these conversations are an effort to prototype a more formal action learning programme on bioregioning. And it's really, really crucial for us to understand what's working well and what's working less well. So we've created a short Google form that won't take you more than a few minutes to answer, and we'd really, really appreciate it if you provide your feedback on this session via that form. I'll pop a link in the chat now so that you can do it in real time if that works for you. And yeah, please do provide even a bare minimum of feedback, because that would be really, really helpful for us. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stuart Cowan, the CEO of Buckminster Fuller Institute, in conversation with Lawrence Grodeska of the Bay Delta Trust in San Francisco and Brandon Letzinger of Great Cascadia in the Pacific Northwest of the USA.
Thanks so much, Kate. Welcome, everybody. Warm hello. Thanks for being here. I'm Stuart Cowan. I'm in Berkeley, California, in the San Francisco Bay Delta watershed on unceded Ohlone territory. I'm the host of Session 4, and in this conversation, I'll be speaking with Lawrence Grodeska from the Bay Delta Trust and Brandon Letzinger with Regenerate Cascadia. We'll be discussing what bioregioning means to us, what we're learning as practitioners, and what we would like to learn next. The challenges of communicating this work, how we're managing multi-stakeholder collaboration, and more. The format is that I'll outline the background of these conversations and then talk a little bit about how this connects with our work at the Buckminster Fuller Institute. I'll then ask Lawrence and Brandon to talk about who they are and what's going on in their bioregions, and I'll facilitate a conversation between the three of us. In all, this will take a bit over an hour, and then we'll open it up for discussion, and you can use the raised hand icon or the chat to ask a question or make an observation. We had originally thought of continuing directly into a debrief session for another hour, but instead we've decided that any of you who would like to help shape the future course will be invited to a couple of online sessions in September. And we'll be following up each session with a Google Form survey for you to fill in feedback that we'll email out. Each session is being recorded and will be available via the Bioregional Learning Center website in due course. If English is not your first language, there is a captions option that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can choose what language you would like the captions in. If you have any problems with this, please place a message in the chat, and one of us will respond. So let me start by telling you where this initiative has come from. I am one of a group of 7 bioregional practitioners who make up the core team that is convening these conversations. You will have seen our names in the invites that have been sent out. We call ourselves the Bioregional Learning Circle, and we're happy to see all of you sitting here around us as part of the wider learning circle that we are calling in. We came together after the Bioregional Regeneration Summit that Isabel Carlisle, who's on today, Melina Angel, and Ben Roberts hosted online in the autumn of 2022, as there was a clear request for more guidance in how to start up in new bioregions. We think that bioregioning is important because we believe that we need new landscape-size structures to help us evolve our capacity to work with systems, geosystems, human systems, and ecosystems. We also need a new story in response to climate change, biodiversity collapse, and faltering human governance. Bioregions and bioregioning tell a powerful and very old story of possibility that brings us all together in service to life itself. Bioregional scale landscapes are a natural unit of regenerating life, large enough to build systemic resilience for the disruptions ahead, small enough to fall in love with. We've been meeting and thinking over the past year into how best to create a resource for bioregioning. These conversations are just a first step into the open so that with your feedback, we can shape a course that is partly online and partly in person, partly a design lab and partly an expanding community of practice. Our core inquiry is, what are the skills and capacities that we most need to do bioregional scale work? How can we grow these in people and places so that many more can join us? We want to engage and support people who have the capacity to make change happen. People need to get really practical about this, get their feet on the ground, so we're teaching the nuts and bolts of how to do this work, especially to young people. We recognize that many would-be bioregional practitioners are at first base and are looking for a different set of resources and employing different skills to the places that have been operating in this way for longer. And we're quite clear that this course will not be full of theory. Instead, it will focus on practice around the world. Stories from the grassroots and real-world case studies, our own experiences and the experiences of our colleagues. And we're clear that there is no orthodoxy in bioregioning. Every place does it differently with a different constellation of skills, which makes coming up with a definition of what bioregioning even is challenging. However, there are many shared threads that run through all bioregional working, and I'm going to name a few here, while others will become clear through the conversations. We're grounded in our places, and we're working both at the human scale of face-to-face meetings and at the international scale of this network of practitioners. We're stretching our brains to think in systems, but not getting lost in complexity. In the narrative that is emerging around bioregioning, human culture and the natural world go hand in hand. We keep connecting things up from being just a load of actions into a coherent strategy. The Belgian physical chemist Ilya Prigogine talked about the need to create, quote, islands of coherence, which we desperately need in this world. It is very hard to do this work without a central organization or learning center that is committed to holding it long term. For that reason, we are reaching out to existing centers of learning, the smaller and more innovative, the better, that would like to teach from and with their bioregions. So just a moment to introduce myself. I grew up in magnificent coastal temperate rainforest, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, the heart of a vast rainforest and such abundance and magnificence and biocultural diversity, and left me with a huge connection with the living world, and was lucky enough to work at EcoTrust in the early 2000s, one of the early bioregional organizations. And EcoTrust organized all of its work around what it called salmonation, so the land area that the salmon could swim to, and also roughly similar to the Cascadia boundaries. So a vast, rugged, beautiful, abundant terrain that also has some extraordinary, very green cities like San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. And within that matrix, we were exploring what we now would call a regenerative economy. We called it a conservation economy back then. And I've continued to work on regenerative economics and finance, regenerative design. I'm trained as a systems scientist at UC Berkeley, and am delighted to see this burgeoning bioregional movement around the world. So I landed at the Buckminster Fuller Institute a year and a half ago. Many of you probably at least know the name Buckminster Fuller. He lived from 1895 to 1983, so quite an extraordinary period. Just think of the massive changes, technological changes, social cultural changes in that lifetime. And he was known as a futurist, a visionary, uh, kind of like a trickster as well, had very provocative ideas about really trying to make the world work for all of life with spontaneous cooperation, and constantly challenged us to break down disciplinary silos, to cooperate, to collaborate, to try things, to not wait for the perfect client, right? To name a project brief, but instead say, this is something that the world needs. here are my capacities. I'm going to try something important for the world. So Fuller developed what he called comprehensive anticipatory design science as a regenerative design discipline that could be applied at scales ranging from individual buildings to global industries and from site to bioregion to planet. At each scale, an understanding of universal principles like ephemeralization, or doing more with less, and syntropy, or negative entropy, combined with deep understanding of local patterns, would ensure cascading benefits across the system and up and down in scale. Already in the 1960s, Fuller explored what he called the world game as a comprehensive peacemaking response to the war games of the time, using the best available data analysis, systems modeling, scenario building, computer technology, and information design of its day. Fuller also applied the world game approach of shared positive scenario building and spontaneous cooperation at regional scale, and greatly influenced many key bioregional initiatives. So, for instance, the Farallon Center, not far from where I'm speaking to you now, in Occidental California, ran from 1974 to 1990, founded by Sim Vanderen and Peter Calthorpe as an early bioregional learning center, experimenting with integrated ecological technologies and supporting broader sustainability initiatives across West Marin County. This center continues as the wonderful Occidental Arts and Ecology Center. Sim Vanderen studied extensively with Fuller, so direct, fascinating lineage there. And Sim and I later wrote the book Ecological Design together. Second, New Alchemy Institute in Falmouth, Massachusetts, Cape Cod, ran from 1969 to 1991. It was founded by John Todd, Nancy Jack Todd, and William McClarney as again, a visionary bioregional learning center that developed new ecological wastewater treatment technologies. The Institute was greatly influenced by Fuller, and key member Greg Watson continues to advance the world game itself at the Schumacher Center for a New Economics. New alchemist Jay Baldwin wrote one of the best books on Fuller called Bucky Works and developed innovative geodesic dome designs. John Todd was a key contributor to the founding of the Balaton Group with Dana Meadows, with its initial vision of a global network of bioregional learning centers. So in a very important early essay that Dana Meadows wrote about the possibility of bioregional learning centers or bioregional hubs, she discusses her conversation with John Todd. So there was this wonderful, um, exciting ferment even in the 1970s and 1980s around bioregionalism. And the third early example I want to mention is the Center for Maximum Potential Building Systems in Austin, Texas, founded in 1975, still going strong. I've been there several times in recent years. It was founded by Pliny Fisk, who continues to be a highly it continues to be a highly influential bioregional learning center and is credited with significant contributions to the LEED Green Building Standard. Pliny Fisk was mentored by Fuller for 5 years as he was forming the center, and he joined us at our Buckminster Fuller Institute 40th anniversary party in San Francisco in December. So a lot of Buckminster Fuller Institute's work is focused on what we call the BFI Design Lab. And among other things, we have a key focus area on bioregional resilience and regeneration. In the 2020s, every region in the world needs the best possible design support to find regenerative pathways for land use, built environment, infrastructure, energy generation, and economic development in the face of increasing climate, biodiversity, water, food, economic, and other disruptions. So in the spirit of the world game, BFI's goal is to invest in this shared capacity in a lean and agile way and apply design science rigorously at regional scale with diverse bioregions to make an integrated set of data, tools, and processes rapidly and broadly available. Some of the initiatives around bioregional resilience and regeneration that we're working on include being invited to co-found the Indigenous Rewilding Network with Roger Frawa at Flower Hill Institute, an Indigenous-led, community-directed nonprofit. The Indigenous Rewilding Network is dedicated to strengthening tribal sovereignty through land return and rewilding projects from tribal nation to continental scale. BFI is collaborating on a bioregional digital twins immersive visualization initiative led by Glenn Page, who many of you know and work with. And Glenn is with the Collaborative for Bioregional Action, Learning, and Transformation, COBALT. And that works also with Jonathan Hughes with Zidaxis in Scotland. BFI has also been invited to support Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab, led by Tyson Yucaporta, as they continue to grow additional labs around the world that can provide indigenous protocols for the work of place-sourced regeneration. And they have some wonderful news. There's now a sister lab in Canada run by Mulaney Goodchild at Algoma University in Northern Ontario. So their hope to just spark these all over the world is beginning to happen. And I see a profound synergy between these kinds of Indigenous knowledge systems labs and bioregional learning centers, bioregional hubs that emerged from maybe a non-Indigenous tradition. And to have these co-located learning together using what some call two-eyed seeing. So having an Indigenous worldview and understanding and compass, and incorporating various kinds of technical Western knowledge as well. BFI also helped incubate a project on bioregional financing facilities that is now the independent BioFi project. The purpose of the project is to unleash investment using new types of life-aligned financing models. Project Director Samantha Power has co-authored a major design paper that will be released soon. BFI is also supporting Thies Vanderhoven and Maddie Ackermans of the wonderful Weathermakers Company in the Netherlands to develop a knowledge commons for landscape scale ecological and water cycle restoration. The Weathermakers has developed a very detailed restoration vision for the Sinai Peninsula. And finally, BFI is in discussions with senior students and collaborators of Buckminster Fullers, including Bonnie DeVarco, Gil Friend, who is the co-founder of the wonderful Institute for Local Self-Reliance and my neighbor here in Berkeley, Peter Meisen with the World Resources Sim Center, Kurt McNamara, and D.W. Jacobs, who authored and performed in a one-man play about Buckminster Fuller. And all of these wonderful lineage holders, people that really knew and worked with Fuller, are exploring a network of bioregional hubs with visualization and simulation abilities. So imagine a network of bioregional learning centers, visualization centers, scenario building centers, doing profound local work, but beginning to link up and learn with each other and perhaps even begin to build larger scale scenarios, linking multiple bioregional efforts up and down the Andes or the Himalayas. So with that, it's really a pleasure to introduce Lawrence Drodeska with the Bay Delta Trust to talk a little bit about his journey to this work and his vision for the Bay Delta Trust. Welcome, Lawrence.
Thanks, Stuart. Really pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen, see if this works. Oh, and we'll go to the top of the deck here. All right. Great. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for the work that's happening globally. I really just, like Stuart said, I'm really tickled and excited and hopeful about the, maybe we can call it bioregionalism 2.0. Maybe it's 3.0. Who knows? I want to start my presentation with a short story about a creature, a species of ape that lived in relative harmony and balance with its family of life. And through a combination of luck and genetic selection and maybe divine intervention, depending on where you sit in the spectrum, this ape learned how to manipulate tools of all kinds. And two in particular, fire and language, led to an unprecedented surplus of caloric energy and rapid evolution. And in some ways, an ascendance to top of the food chain. Along the way, through language, this ape, Homo sapiens, started telling themselves that they were the top of the food chain and that they also were separate from that food chain. And this, I think, is one of the reasons why we're in the spot we're in right now on planet Earth. There is a Hopi term called Koyaanisqatsi, which means life out of balance. And we, the developed industrial moderns, are literally ungrounded. We are out of balance. We're not connected to our place, and we have forgotten our kin, all of life that we grew up with, that we evolved from and with. And I believe that this dissociation from our source is one of the root causes of the crisis we face on the planet Earth today. It's a paradigmatic crisis of meaning that really underpins, for me, the seemingly separate issues of extractive and oppressive economies, public health, loneliness and cynicism, unraveling of the civic fabric. And ultimately, it comes down to the wrong myth. We have a wrong myth that's led to rugged individualism and this separation from nature. I love and have been very inspired by Alan Watts over the many years of my life. And he described what was called the ceramic model as the predominant myth of Judeo-Christian Islamic culture, which envisioned the world as being made out of inanimate stuff or clay, created by a disincarnate divine potter. And this omnipotent potter created humans in their image. And this has led to a sense that we are a construct or an artifact that has been made. And then Watts further felt that the ceramic model changed during the scientific revolution of the 19th century to the fully automatic model, where we maintain the idea of disincarnate stuff, but that the divine presence was sucked away. And there is basically blind energy, inanimate matter, unintelligent force, but we still maintain control in the potter's image. This is in very stark contrast to other creation myths from around the world. This is an image of the Hindu pantheon. Hinduism might well be the oldest continuing religion on the planet. And Watts spoke of the Hindu view of the world is dramatic. It looks like the life as a play. And there's also the Chinese myth of creation, which is organic and looks upon the world as an organism or a body. And really core to these worldviews and belief systems is the notion of interrelationships, whether it be actors on the same stage or parts making the whole of an organism. The important part is that the whole, can't be separated from any of the parts. So why is this important? It's important to me because of first principles, breaking down the complex problems we have to really think about the root causes and what the right responses are. There's a saying that goes, a problem well stated is half solved. I don't know how true that is, but there's certainly a lot of truth to it. I'm very heartened to see all the movement happening around climate action, but I'm also worried at the same time that the climate framing does not go deep enough, that what animates a lot of the effort right now around environmentalism and do-goodery is more of a band-aid or a solve than addressing really the fundamental disconnect that we have. We have to address our warming of planet, but tending to carbon alone will not stop the desecration of and degradation of ecosystems. It won't stop habitat loss. It won't stop species extinction. And it certainly won't restore or regenerate our ecosystems alone. So humanity needs to realign our systems and institutions with the natural world upon which all life depends. And we must have a reunion with life. We need to re-inhabit our place amongst the plants, animals, and mushrooms and all of life. And we can no longer afford to imagine a separation or dominion over the separate natural world. So enter bioregionalism. Biocultural regions provide, I believe, the right scale for holistic, life-aligned governance, economies and institutions that can empower thriving, resilient communities and ensure quality of life for all human and more than human life. And I am personally excited about bioregionalism as a framework which enables some critical components, which I think that are challenges that we face as a society and as humanity right now. Place-based identity, positive futures, new models of pluralistic pro-social network governance, and of course, all of this grounded in ecology. So speaking of ground, where am I? I am in the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin River Delta. This is the largest tidal estuary on the west coast of the Americas. I'll go back here. This is a map with the counties of California, as well as the drainage basin in orange of the entire Bay Delta estuary. And this is the same map, but with watersheds. Ecological crises don't stop at the county line. And so with the fuzzy boundaries of ecology, I think we're able to come together and address these crises a bit more effectively. So the Bay Delta Trust is a weaving and convening initiative seeking to improve network coordination and increase regenerative investments in the Bay Delta bioregion. We're exploring new place-based models of pluralistic governance and collaboration to protect and steward our home and to improve the quality of life for all here in the Bay Delta. We're honored to be fiscally sponsored by the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and we're working closely with Stuart and that incredible network of humans. And, we also have a real legacy of bioregional work here in the Bay Area. Peter Berg called San Francisco home, and he was one of the original proponents of bioregionalism. The Planet Drum Foundation articulated the concept of bioregionalism in the 70s, and Peter wrote and spoke about re-inhabiting place or becoming native to places. And that work was really more influential than a lot of folks know. In the mid 80s, Peter convened a bunch of Bay Area groups to draft a Green City program for urban sustainability, the Green City Program book. And this was published in 1989. He convened a series of annual Shasta bioregion gatherings across Northern California to discuss shared problems and specific emphasis on the local locations, the host locations. And one of the co-authors of the Green City program in 1992 created the City and County of San Francisco's Environment Commission, and then its environmental department in 1996. And so there's a direct linkage between the early roots of bioregionalism and municipal environmental programs. San Francisco Environment Department has been incredibly influential across the country and the world. I should know I worked there for 3.5 years, and it's to see the influence that that department has had on recycling programs and green building and climate action plans, carbon inventory at the municipal level is really remarkable. So, I see this work that the bioregional work in the Bay Delta as part of a process that's been going on for some time. Just as far as the Western developed world, but we certainly can go back even further to the Coast Miwok or the Ohlone people that lived here in harmony with the landscape for much longer. This is a good moment just to share a little bit about who I am. I love being outside in nature. I love water. I love birds, and I trace a lot of that back to my time in the Boy Scouts, being outside, experiential, skill-based learning. And that was one of my early experiences too of collaborating in groups, being a youth leader. And that led to one of my other loves, which is governance. I'm a civic geek. I love bringing people together. That's why I worked in local government for 7 years and ran a consulting company for 10 years, serving local governments. I'm just very interested in community, how people make decisions together, and how we improve on that core capacity. And I really think at this point that bioregionalism 2.0 needs to engage with governance institutions and power structures. This is something that we all need to learn and understand how to interface and how to start to change some of those institutions. I've come to bioregionalism from a long journey. I was first exposed to it in 1995 in David Ehrenfeld's conservation ecology class in Rutgers University. And the idea has really stuck with me, but it's only been the last year or so that I've been thinking about it, and the last 6 months that I've been exploring it more formally here in the Bay Delta area. This slide is up here because I want to share a little bit of a nature metaphor about the hope of bioregionalism for me. A watershed is an area where all water drains to the same body or river. As rain falls from the sky, it collects in a fractal array of landscapes and streamlets flowing through streams and rivers, coming together in a unity of direction and purpose. And I see this as one of the promises of bioregionalism, shared coherence, learning together. And it's one of the reasons why I'm using the working name of Bay Delta Trust. A trust is a financial and legal entity. Trust is also an interpersonal quality that we've lost in some corners of society that we need to reinvigorate. So always look to nature for how we can find what's important. What does that look like on the ground? This is sort of the model we're pursuing. Community learning ecosystem, the bioregional learning center approach, researching and convening actors and allies across the bioregion to develop a cohesive picture of our past, present, and future. Growing that into a tapestry of regenerative projects, supporting existing projects, but also building capacity for new projects that align with the bioregional vision. This could look like a venture studio or a formal foundation or trust that will be emergent. And eventually, really a broad-based collaborative funding and governance ecosystem that is the result of a co-designing of an inclusive and participatory governance structure. My 1,000-day goal is a 100-year vision for the Bay Delta bioregion, creating a container and a space for and an invitation for anybody that wants to share their vision for what the future could look like, what quality of life means to them. Bioregionalism is a huge container. We can't really boil the ocean, although we kind of are, but we need to be specific. So a couple of focus areas that I'm thinking about for this specific geography. Water, food, and fire are critical issues for our Mediterranean climate here on the West Coast of the United States. And really thinking about enablers like Indigenous wisdom and leadership, education, economy, and culture to be able to get to the regenerative work that we want to see happen. And lastly, just specifically what we're working on right now, we're early in the discovery phase. This is a listening and learning moments, doing a lot of interviews, listening with humility and curiosity to find the others, and sense making for opportunities for early traction. We are hosting monthly community calls for anyone that wants to join, highlighting a certain project in the bioregion that's doing good work. We're doing an asset mapping process. This is something that I've needed to learn as a practitioner. How do we understand the strengths that exist in our current system, institutions, individuals, projects, physical, natural assets, and how do we map them and make them more available? I'm particularly excited in that process to develop an emergent taxonomy of place that can help connect an individual from the piece of land they're standing on or living in, all the way up through their creek watershed, to their neighborhood association, to the larger watershed, to the bioregion. I think that story of place becomes really important, and it takes some work to really map that out and make it accessible for folks. And we're doing a lot of convening. So we have a strategy workshop coming up next week with some core collaborators. There's a group of folks that are starting to host bioregional field trips, a bioregional explorers club. And we're also getting ready to do some mapathons to move the asset mapping forward. The last thing I'll share is that here in the West Coast of the Americas, in Northern California, we have a lot of redwoods. They actually go all the way up to Cascadia. So this is a little bit of a handoff to Brandon. But redwoods have very shallow roots. They don't go down more than 6 or 12 feet. There's no taproot. And yet somehow we rarely see the redwood overturned, like the image on the left here. And they do that by interweaving their roots together. But they share nutrients, they share structural strength just by virtue of their interconnection and interrelationship. And I think that's one of the promises of bioregionalism that I'm bringing to this effort. So thank you all again for your time. If you want to check out our work, you can go to baydelta.org. We do have a public asset mapping project up at baydelta.org/commons. And this is where we're tracking all of the organizations and projects that we're learning about. So trying to really be open and transparent about this. Happy to share more if you're interested. I'll pass it over to Brandon.
Great. Thanks so much, Lawrence. And I'm pleased to introduce Brandon Letzinger with Regenerate Cascadia to talk a little bit about his journey to this work and his vision for Regenerate Cascadia.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Lawrence. I think that was a wonderful introduction. And Lawrence, what a great introduction also to Planet Drum and bioregionalism and those early roots. And what I really love about that as well is just what a deep connection and impact that had specifically here within the Cascadia bioregion as well, and especially as part of our early formation process that really happened in the early 1980s and late 1980s. Yeah. So just to start and maybe share a little bit about myself and my own process is, yeah, this has been a big learning journey. I first kind of stumbled on the idea of Cascadia in 2005, and it was a very different landscape, and it was very disconnected from the idea of bioregionalism. And so, along with my own organizing and work, there's also been a learning component that is really about deepening that connection with place, with these earlier bioregional movements, and with the idea that what they were saying in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, all the way up to the present, is just as current and relevant today, if not more so, as kind of these issues become more pressing. So for those who aren't aware, my name is Brandon Letzinger, and I'm a co-administrator for a program called Regenerate Cascadia. I partner with Claire Atwell, who the two of us are working to kind of grow this idea. We met last year in the Salmon Nation Edge Prize, and kind of even tangentially before that through the Regenerative Communities Network Global Summit that they held in 2022. And what was really amazing is that when we met, we had this idea for how do we actually start to get people activated and empowered and care about the places they live, and how can we be empowering that work? And so we really wanted to challenge people with what would it take to actually regenerate an entire bioregion. I'm also the executive director for the Department of Bioregion. We're a nonprofit social movement organization located here in Seattle. Our mission is a world of interconnected bioregions and bioregional movements. We strive to educate, activate, and organize. And then through Regenerate Cascadia itself, our goal and purpose is really to look at what it takes to regenerate the Cascadia bioregion and to create the conditions for a regenerative culture and movement to thrive. So more than just the regeneration, what is everything else needed to help see people supported in the work that they're doing, and then to connect and empower them together. For those who aren't familiar, Cascadia is a place. It is a bioregion as defined through the watersheds of the Fraser and Columbia rivers. It stretches from southeast Alaska in the north all the way down to Cape Mendocino in the south, and as far east as the Yellowstone caldera. To the west, it actually stretches about 50 miles off the coast, and it follows what's known as the Cascadia subduction zone, where there's great tectonic forces kind of smashing together. So if you ever hear of the megaquake that's going to kill us all in the Northwest, that would be the Cascadia subduction zone that will kind of help do that. This name Cascadia originally comes from a geologist in the 1970s, 1975, Bates McKee. He was a professor at the University of Washington, and he wrote a seminal textbook called Cascadia, the Geologic Evolution of the Pacific Northwest. And he actually died in a plane crash not too long after that. But the name was picked up by his friend and colleague, David McCloskey, in 1981, who kind of first gave the term Cascadia to this idea of Cascadia as a bioregion, as a distinct socio-cultural region, and really looking at what that means. But I think what's really interesting is that beyond just the watersheds, it really does heart and deep into that idea that the plate tectonics and the geology really defines this landscape. If you're not quite familiar with the area here, so the Cascadia bioregion stretches for about 2,500 miles, from Alaska down to Cape Mendocino. And within that, it is a part of 2 different countries and several different states and provinces. And so all of these, if you look at it, maybe are not very reflective of the actual reality of the ecosystems of the communities or the people living here. And so starting with kind of the Cascadia bioregion and bioregionalism, we want to use this as a tool to kind of break down these arbitrary lines on the map, and maybe start from the place and the people living here and kind of grow systems up that are actually more representative of the people in place. This idea of bioregionalism harkens back to, I think Lawrence did a really wonderful introduction to it. But at its most basic, it just simply means find your place on the planet, dig in, and take responsibility from there. So it really is about using the physical, the ecological, and the cultural realities to help us grow tools and ways of living within a place that are more responsible, appropriate, and where we can actually be creating regenerative futures and outcomes. We can also be using these bioregional frameworks as kind of a nice membrane that helps us break down those intangible issues when we talk about climate change or all of these kind of big disconnected ideas. And we can actually break those down into a place and have for measurable impact. And so we can measure, whether it's carbon sequestration, biodiversity, many other things, we can actually have measurable outcomes for if we're being successful or not. Yeah, so just to kind of continue that narrative, after Planet Drum kind of helped really grow this idea of bioregions in the mid 70s, you had Ernest Kallenbach who wrote Ecotopia in 1975. This idea spread northward, and by the 80s, it was really picked up by a group of organizers here in Cascadia, all throughout Oregon and Washington and up into British Columbia. And they helped, starting in 1986, they started to organize a series of bioregional congresses. And these gathered hundreds of people together, and people would come as delegates of their different watersheds, of their different communities. And some of them would represent animals or plants that they thought was important. Others would come with policy issues. And then they would meet and they would really talk about what they wanted to see for the next year. And the whole idea was that these were participatory, they were delegative, and they were designed for impact and action. And so a lot of the actual early recycling programs and composting programs, organizations like TILth and these other really major environmental organizations now all kind of really actually grew out of these bioregional roots. Other ideas that really took decades of building, like the Salish Sea, also had their kind of roots in these early gatherings. And so they met in Olympia in 1986, they met in Oregon in 1987, and then they had two different conferences in 1988 up in British Columbia, including a North American Bioregional Congress that helped weave all of this together with other people doing this in North America. Another really important strain I want to name is this idea of bioregional mapping. I think Lawrence did a wonderful job introducing it, and Peter Berg was actually very seminal in some of that early work. But that was also picked up by a lot of groups up here, and I think that some of the people who really helped push that forward were actually different First Nations in British Columbia who, living on their unceded lands, actually sued the government of British Columbia, and then actually it went up to the Supreme Court of Canada to gain sovereignty over the territories of where they lived. And as part of this, starting in 1984, they employed a bioregional mapping process. They brought on French-Canadian cartographer Louis Skoda, Douglas Aberley, who became very influential in carrying on this idea, was just out of school. And so he also kind of helped and started to get involved in those processes. And what they did is they developed these really cool ways for helping map space, but not in the lens of a colonial Western framework. So really challenging the notion that maps are just only tools of governments and colonial powers. And so they did a great, really cool, like oral history project. They mapped and traced the different migratory patterns of, animals and hunting, and really gathered a lot of stories and place names, and then put that all together in these really dense, really illustrative bioregional atlases. And those atlases actually became the base of their legal documents that they then used in these court cases. And all to say that this is really important and has a direct link today where they're still fighting for their sovereignty and is still directly involved in trying to block a lot of the kind of extraction based economies. And so this also leads rise to this idea of Cascadia as a thin green line with an outsized impact that there's only 3 or 4 different deep water ports on the West Coast. And so between the extractive resource economies in the eastern parts of the United States and Canada, and then these developing and emerging markets in Asia that are really hungry for raw resources, we actually do have an ability to make a lot of change here. And so with that, Douglas Aberley kind of really carried on this tradition of bioregional mapping, developed some really amazing early books on mapping for local empowerment. These processes were picked up and put into the Gulf Islands and employed by literally thousands of people who would meet and create their own maps and create their own atlases, really mapping the things that they felt important and really working to break down these arbitrary boundaries and lines into more bioregional frameworks. And what was really cool and powerful about that is that type of thinking helped us kind of break down some of these more national, arbitrary nation-state boundaries and borders, and really think of different bioregional frameworks like the Salish Sea, which might be a little bit more directly relevant. And then if you're not really familiar with Cascadia or the Cascadia movement, Cascadia is more than just a place. It's a bioregion, but it's also a social movement, it's an identity, and then it also can help us become a vision for something that we're all working together. So as a social movement, it's really geared towards building around the principles and values that we find special. So giving a name and a definition to the things that makes, you know, that living here such a wonderful experience, and then helping people come together around that. So culture is also very powerful because it's everything from music, it's food, it's our social different interactions, it's sports, and all the rest of that. So the Cascadia, we call this is called the Doug flag, the Cascadia flag. And unlike a national flag, we see this as a bioregional symbol. So it's representative of the landscape. So it's green for the forest, white for the mountains, blue for the waters, with a Douglas fir, because that Douglas fir grows throughout the bioregion, along with, like, you know, the western red cedar, or, you know, other trees that really just follow that bioregional pattern. By creating this symbol, we want every person to kind of, you know, break down these and snap out of these like arbitrary nation state boundaries and identities that might be not really based on shared connection of place. And so by doing that, it creates, you know, they become based on division and kind of really like negative hostility and like a lack of resources, rather than cooperation, whole systems thinking, where we can be working together. By sharing a land base, we actually have a common future. And if we're living here and it's, you know, smoke season for a month, that affects all of us, regardless of what your arbitrary nation state identity might be. So our goal is really to create and foster a positive sense of place, a positive community of people that can come together and support that. And then just ways to get active and help people connect with this idea. We have 18 million people who call this region home, and we want to reach out with every single one of them, have a positive connection, and have a way that they can walk out their front door and get active about issues they care about. And once they take that step, we need to have ways to support them, and so that they can connect in with broader, different kind of communities. These social movements then can also become very important and powerful in helping defend the things that we find special, helping stop the extractive resources. So there's almost like a kind of a two-tiered approach, that one is short-term and pragmatic, working within the systems to protect what's left, while also working outside of them in a long-term utopian manner. Yeah, so these are just some of the different kind of ways that people have kind of really kind of embraced the different identity and kind of ways that they've done that. So yeah, so just going back to then Cascadia as a place in a bioregion, and then how we define that, this idea of watersheds becomes really important. So it is about creating a whole systems approach that includes an entire watershed, with the idea that nature also acts on landscapes, watersheds, ecoregions, bioregions. And so whatever response that we really want to think about also needs to be kind of embedded within that same type of framework. The Cascadia bioregion has 15 major watersheds running throughout. The two largest is the Fraser and the Columbia. Those two watersheds make up about 60% of the entire landmass. And it is a massive area. But there is also a recognition that if we want to work together, it needs to be along this whole framework. And there will be different regions within that with their own unique and distinct ways of operating. Yeah. So, and then outside of the major watersheds, there's also 75 different ecoregions. Ecoregion just means a regional ecosystem. So that will be a distinct area that will have its own way or own method that it needs to employ to create these frameworks of stewardship that are relevant for that area. We kind of think of these as the rooms in the house, whereas the bioregion is the house and the ecoregions are kind of working within that. But again, they're not the whole system by themselves. And so within that, for Regenerate Cascadia, we've kind of identified several different nested, interconnected frameworks that we work within, starting with the bioregion, going down to the watershed, a major watershed, stepping down into the ecoregion, stepping down into the smaller watersheds, with the idea being that the landscapes within those watersheds are the places that we take action. That's where we can walk out the front door. That's where we're all experts of our home places, and we can make these connections. And then what we need to be doing is helping connect that action on that eco-regional scale, on that regional scale, so that people can connect with each other, see the work that's happening, learn from each other, both within a place and across a place. I think the only last thing I'll touch on is just that boundaries are real. They aren't just abstractions on a map, so you can literally just see them, and that's very powerful. When I say that we kind of start that Cascadia is defined through the geology and watersheds, we also think about this as a story of deep time. So it's like the oldest stories, and within that, those hard, jagged edges give definition to how everything interacts within that. It's the wind, it's the rain, it's the soils, it's the temperature. All of it will be defined by these really hard lines. If you live here, you can't talk about organizing together or bioregions or anything without also including the fact that we live along the Cascadia subduction zone, which gives rise to all of the different mountains. More recently, our area was shaped and defined through the retreat and advancement of glaciers over and over and over again. The Missoula ice dams breaking and flooding every 50 years for thousands of years, as well as when those ended, some of the longest continually inhabited settlements in North America were here as soon as those receded. So for more than 1,000 generations, people have been living here, have been living bioregionally, and calling this place home. And these areas have served as these central kind of bridges of interaction of not just place and ecosystem, but also culture. So just to say that we start with the hard lines because these processes give shape to everything that we do and how things have arisen in this place. You can see this with like how the wind interacts. You can see it with the rain and the precipitation. And then it's really important as we start to talk about layers of stewardship and frameworks of stewardship that we might think that are really important. So as Stuart was naming, this area is also traditionally known as Salmon Nation. And that is such a wonderful and powerful framework. And again, if we're talking about restoring, protecting, celebrating salmon, that needs to be a bioregional discussion. No one little part of one watershed here or there will be enough to really look at that. Instead, we need to employ a whole system lens for really examining what that looks like and means. Within that, we see how this impacts the people living here through literally thousands of generations of indigenous knowledge and wisdom and communities. And then we see how this also impacts the people living here today. So we see how people spend money. We talk about how people talk to each other. And we can see how these regional identities and bioregional identities form and what actually makes sense. All the way to different, like football and baseball, who supports who. And you even there, you see these like regional clusterings along these bioregional lenses. These frameworks also then have become adopted by a whole range of federal and policy planners. So you have the Cascadia Corridor, the Cascadia Mega Region, the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. You have people who are recognizing that by organizing bioregionally, it makes more sense than arbitrary lines on a map, especially in this place. So all of that to say that what's the point? And the point is that nature acts bioregionally. And so this is really important. So it's like if we want to be organizing, it needs to be bioregional. No one state or province by itself will ever be able to solve or address the issues that we need. And especially as we start to get into greater climate change, global warming, all the rest of it, we're going to need regional policies of all of us working together and in ways where those that are most impacted can actually have a say and a voice in the policies that affect their lives. So we need to be able to use these place-based frameworks to help weave together stakeholders so that everybody can be present and accounted for. Right now, that giant picture of the Columbia River, they're renegotiating all of the treaties in a very historic process. And the people who need to be there are First Nations, farmers, environmentalists, hunters, cities, counties, states, countries. You know, it's just such a huge mix of people, but they all need to be a part of that conversation. This is also the areas where the dams are. It's where the food comes from. It's where our energy is produced, hydroelectric, solar. So all of those things need to be a part of that conversation. And each one offers specific frameworks of stewardship that we can be collaboratively working together around. It can be an air shed, it could be a watershed, a fiber shed, a food shed. And all to just say, this is my home where I live in Seattle. I live in the Salish Sea. We have 8 million people living in this one picture. And yet there's an arbitrary line running down the middle of it. So we need to be building our own better frameworks that can better represent the places that we live. The United States uses one type of measurement. Canada uses another one. Every map that you see literally will run up to this line and stop. It doesn't make any sense. So when we can come in with our own GIS tools, when we can come in and create our own maps and our own informational commons, it's incredibly powerful. And those systems provide an actual more powerful framework that is more effective for citizen science, for the people living here, for policymakers, than what currently exists. And as we can create those tools, people will use them. All to say that when we're also thinking about this scope, I do live also within the Cascadia mega region. And so this is an area that's been identified where we have 80% of the population of our entire bioregion on 12% of the land. And so again, there is an ability for outsized impact where we can make the change happen by focusing in these corridors, and we can impact and change for millions of people. Not only that, but we're the home of Amazon, of Boeing, of Starbucks, of these huge global systems. And so when we talk about a thin green line, we have the power and outsized to shift policy literally around the world. So all to say that current borders do not represent the physical realities of where we live or our communities. Nature acts bioregionally and does not stop at human borders. These borders impede our coordination, action, and climate solutions. With all of that out of the way, I'll just kind of jump back for a moment and very briefly walk through last year. So out of the Salmon Nation and where I met Claire, we won the Systems and Governance Grant, receiving a $5,000 grant. With that, we worked with a community of about 100 different people spread all throughout the Salish Sea and Willamette Valley. And we organized an activation tour, which happened last October and November. We met with about 1,000 people spread throughout 30 days in those 14 different communities. And we talked with regenerative leaders and communities. And what was also amazing is that every single stop, bioregional elders came out. We got to do interviews. We documented as much as we could, but all with the question of what would it take to regenerate a bioregion. Afterwards, we went and we traveled in person round and round. And then afterwards, we came together for an online capstone event that actually brought the people that we have been meeting with, world-class people in permaculture and a whole variety of different things together where they met online. Everybody got to give workshops and share really special, areas of their expertise. And then the week following, we met and then actually started to talk about what would Regenerate Cascadia look like and what would we need to do that. A big part of the activation tour was also creating a movement map, starting to trace who and what was where, and then really also identifying the need for building networks of trust based on relationships, that rather than faceless organizations of whatnot, it was really important actually to go out and meet the people doing the work. I'll just kind of go through this pretty quickly, but when we did our activation tour, we had several different core design challenges that we were able to identify. Primarily, the work is happening in the landscapes, but it's not connected. The capacity to support this work does not currently exist. If we want to fund a light rail, Seattle can raise $54 billion for even just a one phase of that expansion project. If we want to build a school, we can raise a levy or bond for several hundred million. But if we want to regenerate a watershed, go donate to a nonprofit. That funding mechanism does not exist. And within that, even if it wanted to exist, it doesn't, because the people doing the work are busy doing the work. They're often underfinanced, under-resourced, and they don't have the time to go looking for funding opportunities. So there is no way to kind of create a bridge between funders who want to fund regenerative work in the landscapes and the people who are actually doing it. And that those who are positioned now to take advantage of that are often the existing corporations, governments, other things, nonprofits, that are already like maintaining the status quo. And so they subsume it and co-opt it. Many people don't know their own bioregional frameworks, stories of place, or the different stewardship, layers of stewardship. I think in addition, work is siloed. It's not being coordinated above a landscape level, and people aren't working in a landscape together. So everything is individual, project by project, it's competitive. And so because of that, we learned a few different lessons that we really wanted to work with people, not necessarily organizations, working with people who wanted to work with us, and that our work must be connected with the work happening on the ground. Everything that we're doing must come and kind of stem from that. Because of this, since then, we've now been working for about well, I guess actually now it's been more like 6 or 7 months. We've had about 130 people who have actually kind of stuck with us after the activation tour and have been helping us grow these models and help us experiment about what we might actually need. I think our big goals are, how do we help visualize the people out there in the landscape doing the work? How do we get them supported with what they need as defined by them? And so how can we create accountable and transparent governance and kind of be a bridge and conduit that can help connect people with that funding and support that they need? More than that, then how do we also help weave together learning across landscapes? Because people are out there doing the work and it is incredible. It's inspiring. And yet people haven't even met each other. People are not aware that other things are happening. So we really need to find ways to connect and support that as well. The different ways that we've decided to kind of do that are through this idea of ambassadors, of this idea of helping. We need to have onboarding education that helps give us all a shared context and understanding. It's the idea of hubs in a landscape, weaving together the work and people in a landscape. So not just project by project, but actually creating a landscape vision, a landscape budget. What would it look like to come together between a land trust and a solar power company and affordable housing company, and to actually create a shared vision of that place that was connected with a budget for what they need to do the work? And then we could be working to kind of weave that together. How do we create a stronger story of place? As well as those learning centers, the sites, and the informational commons that can help us do the measurement, the reporting, the verification that actually helps us determine if we're being successful. And then lastly, we're also building communities of practice, which are really around providing welcoming spaces around topics where people can be doing skill training, sharing skills that landscape leaders might need. And then lastly, we're supporting and building an administrative backend to help support projects. And the projects are the work that's actually happening. And then what we're trying to also figure out is, how do we actually kind of support the work? So is it a bioregional financing facility? Is it an action fund? Is it collective impact organizing and federated grant making? But either way, we're more powerful when we come together with 15 different groups in an area than one. And so really helping build that shared identity and shared purpose is going to be really important. We're also acknowledging and recognizing that we also just are limited on capacity. And so a lot of what we're doing right now is just geared towards slowing down, sense making, and growing our own capacity. So we're kind of putting things on pause a little bit till September. We want to get our website up by, sometime around September. We want to have the idea of what a hub is. We want to have the idea of what a guild is kind of set there, but also with the idea that we're not going to be able to do it this year. And so instead, we really want to do a deep sense-making process that helps us actually start to form these hubs, and probably starts with bioregional mapping. It starts with storytelling and connecting to place. And it starts with people coming together to talk about what they need so that we even have an idea of what it might take to do this work. Because right now we don't know. So then it's also about supporting like these kind of proto activities, having a cup of coffee, having a campfire, going for a hike. It means that we're kind of co-creating what this process looks like with about 100 other people, with the idea that we want to start doing these federated grants together where we can actually have a shared narrative and purpose. And then also we'll start to be developing our pilot program so that maybe next year, or when we do start to have more funding, we can actually start to grow these hubs and the guilds. And then also so that they have a coherent vision so that they can go get started right now, finding people in the landscape, creating those funding ecosystems to get started. And so I think with that, I'll stop.
Brandon, just fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lawrence. Just some extraordinary conversations. So I'd love to run through a few questions, just really quick. Just give me like 1-2 minute responses off the cuff. What would you like to learn about bioregioning as practitioners?
Yeah, I'll jump in and start. I mentioned it during my presentation, but I've been really interested in the process of asset mapping as a component of asset-based community development. Um, I've been doing sort of deep dive on the literature. This is a process by which a community identifies its core strengths and learns about itself in order to understand how to move forward in a positive framing rather than a deficit framing where a consultant comes in and says, this is broken, we need to fix it. The community understands itself and how it can help itself and where it needs to do the work. And so I've been doing a lot of research on it, trying to find folks that have done this work. And I've found a little bit, I've been doing some writing on it. But I think that's just, for me, that has so much promise. There's also sort of a relationship building component of that work. There's also a mapping, obviously, component of that work. So that to me feels like a core capacity for bioregional practitioners that I would love to see more conversation around. And if anybody on this call has experience doing that work or great examples or sort of prior art around existing asset maps, please share because that's something that I'm interested in learning more about.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I am continually inspired by the amazing work that other people are doing. And so I even just find being in cohort with other people and who are doing things is just incredible and such a great learning experience. I also really like when things are action focused. And so having outcomes that's beyond just an academic environment that's disconnected from the work actually happening, but that's actually supporting it, that's growing capacity. And I'll just say it like, on my own personal learning journey, it's taken a lot of time. A lot of the early bioregional resources never made it onto the internet. They were printed in the 70s and the 80s, and they just never quite made the jump. And so I started organizing with Cascadia in about 2005. David McCloskey didn't have his website up until 2009. I didn't see a copy of the first bioregional Congress until 2014. And then as soon as I did, I went, whoa. And then it wasn't until about 2019 that I went down and got to meet Judy in San Francisco and see these like huge bioregional archives that just like really opened my eyes. And a lot of the materials are also really rare online. And so I think that there is an incredible opportunity for making these resources more accessible and maybe a little bit of synthesizing all of the wonderful work that happened just so that we can make these learning processes faster and more accessible for people that are just kind of tuning into the idea. And I'll just second that I think the keeping with the positive framework that's really building a supportive community and culture as well, I think is really important.
That's
And
great.
since there's Stuart, since I see a comment from Melina in the
Yeah,
chat around governance,
yeah,
I've
great.
also been doing kind of like a deep dive around sort of like more mature governance models. We have in the United States electoral mechanism, which is a ballot box, and it's very flat. It's designed 200 years ago. There's many other tools and processes we could be combining to have a more dynamic, nested, participatory process. So I'm really interested in learning about that I've been involved in different pieces of it and different parts of the process, but what does like a more mature dynamic model that takes into account the types of decisions that are made, who makes them, at what scale are they made, what is the longitudinal process of managing, a strategic vision, a financing body, whatever they might be. So I know there's some prior art out there around this as well, but this is a call to the network. If there is, sort of like large scale regional governance models that people have been experimenting with, or even just on paper from a theoretical perspective, this is something that I think is really critical for this community to be engaged in, and at least starting to have hypotheses around what large scale direct participatory governance could look like, because it's going to take a long time for us to get there, and we need to start experimenting as much as we can with the pieces of the puzzle where we can when we have the opportunity. So just going to add that on the pile.
Yeah, Melina's question, I want to quote, it's very rich. Her question is about the governance coherence of such a huge area, whether that's Cascadia or even your area is pretty large too. The Bay Delta Trust is tackling an enormous geography as well. So huge area. What is the connection between so many people? Is it possible participatory processes can make collective decisions? Have you thought about that nested hubs guilds functioning process? And you ran us through a little bit about that nested structure, Brandon. That's very interesting. I haven't seen that, in many bioregional settings. So just to follow on from that a little bit, how does the current wave of bioregionalism interact with existing power structures and layers of government? The early waves, 1970s to the 1990s, often tried to stake out completely new territory. They just wanted to disengage completely with existing political jurisdictions, agencies, and so forth. And I know, Lawrence, you're very pragmatic. You've interacted with dozens, literally dozens of agencies around the Bay Area. And there's kind of an interesting paradox of almost many, many layers of governance can create complexity as well. Why not add a place-based layer, and it actually might create simplicity in other ways, right? And actually disentangle areas that almost have too many layers of governance not really aligned with ecological and cultural processes.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I'm going to use a industrial sort of metaphor where the rubber hits the road, maybe where it's the feet hit the trail. It's not easy, but this is again a core skill that we need to build as bioregional practitioners. We need to start engaging with existing power structures. We need to start to learn how existing governance works, from municipal up through regional, state, and federal, so that we can be clear about how to engage with these systems, but also what we want to do differently. I think about the integral framework from Ken Wilber. There's a notion of transcend and include. At every level of evolution, we don't leave behind entirely where we came from. There are certain elements of our prior state that get included in the next state. And that's not necessarily a conscious process, but we can't just forget about what happened before. We will never leave behind entirely our existing societal structures. So with that in mind, I don't think that we just can't hide in the forest. And, the back to the land movement, as beautiful as it is, and as important as bioregional hubs and place-based communities are, they have to exist within the existing societal footprint to a certain extent. So really quickly, what I see as far as engaging with those power structures, how I've been thinking about it from new bioregional institutions, is four methods. One is that we partner with existing institutions when there is overlap around a bioregional vision. If there's good work already happening, we support that. We collaborate. There's a lot of funding that exists for restoration and regenerative work, especially in California with this whole nature-based solutions program at the state. That is funding that could be directed to the right bioregional efforts, and hopefully, local cooperatively owned businesses that we spin up to do this work. The second is that if there's a lack of understanding about some of the bioregional vision or importance of an integrated ecological framework, we start to advocate and educate water districts, water boards, the planners, the agency people. invite them on our bioregional field trips, invite them into this conversation about an integrated ecological perspective and why this is what we need to be doing. The third is if there's just unwillingness to play, we marshal our own resources to do this work where we can. Government kind of doesn't tend to get into private land management because they can't. And there are some examples, but I think we could be directly engaging with private landowners, private ranchers to help them understand the benefits of restoration and whether it's rangeland or marshland or whatever. And then the fourth is a notion of a partner state. Michelle Bowens, kind of a peer-to-peer thinker, has posited a partner state where some responsibilities of existing governance institutions start to devolve into a different participatory state or partner state, whereby maybe it's a land trust model where land has been put aside for conservation, but who manages that and who has the resources to do that? Local government doesn't. Increasingly, government is constrained. And so can we be a partner that actually can take on some of the responsibilities necessary to steward our natural resources that government just can't do anymore? So that's kind of a sort of a theory of change around interacting with this existing power structures that I've thought about. Brandon, anything to add to that?
There's a great comment here from David Bollier, actually, that one instructive existing model for governance is a federated collaboration of smaller scale commons, much as the digital commonsverse has done with open source Wikipedia, open education, open science, etc. So we're seeing some very interesting digital innovations, commons innovations that can work in all kinds of different domains, and then really grounding that now in place-based regeneration processes. Many movements converging. Another provocation for you both. How do you think about the balance between your own bioregional work and then participating in regional and global learning communities? What are some of the larger networks that you're participating? It'd be great if you could just name some of those. I know you're both very active in several.
Brandon, I'll pass this one to you.
Well, so I guess what type of participatory networks are you thinking about?
Yeah, so for instance, Joe Brewer has been working with the design
Sure.
school for regenerating Earth.
Mhm.
There are regional networks in Europe with bioregional weaving labs. I know, Lawrence, that you're participating in Glenn Page's Cobalt Fellows program. So just, yeah, some of these ways
Okay.
to get really just parallax, just getting
Yeah,
people that
I
are
think
trying to do the sense making in regions actually learning with each other.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time, and I think that there's a really special window that we have where a lot of people are just coming into this idea of bioregionalism or bioregioning, and we have a really wonderful opportunity to actually help create kind of a North Star or a shared context, shared language, so that we can all be working collaboratively and in support of each other. So a few of these different networks that we've been really partnering with since the activation tour is since February, we've been we put together a Cascadia cohort of about 50 people to take part in the design school for regenerating Earth. That's Joe Brewer's thing, as you were naming. And we've been using that as an opportunity to kind of give ourselves some space and some breathing room, but also to collaboratively co-create what a hub might look like, and what is a bioregional learning center, and what is an informational commons, and what does that mean, and what do they need? And then that's been really nice, and it's been really exciting to see that conversation also happening. When we talk about nested scales, there's an entire whole nother series of fractal all the way up. That's how do we work together on a continental scale, and then a bioregional scale, and then down to that ecoregional and the local. And what's beautiful is that there's so much opportunity for collaboration and partnership and developing what that is. We've been working also with Samantha Powers is about to, I think, release her white paper soon, and so I know that we helped kind of write a case study for that that's being included, and then also lots of other people, both locally, and I know that there's a group of people working around this idea of a planetary regeneration alliance. Locally, we've also been working with the Open Futures Coalition, and what's really exciting is then also to see, yeah, how we can both be empowering and supporting our work and organizing locally, but then making sure that everything that we're doing is replicable, templatizable, and that can be shared into either like, general libraries or happen cross-currently. And so there's a lot of different partnerships also happening with other bioregions, from New Zealand to the Great Lakes, where this learning can happen in parallel together.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. And I'm involved with many of the same. I've been listening in and participating as I can in Joe Brewer's Birthing Bioregional Learning Centers course. And it's a great community, and I've appreciated, Brandon, your sharing of bioregional mapping. So this kind of cross-fertilization is amazing. I also want to give a shout out to Glenn Page and the Casco Bay region through the Collaborative for Bioregional Action, Learning, and Transformation. It's a cohort-based model where they have selected a few different bioregions compared to sort of the very open and broad approach for Design School for Regenerating Earth. And I think it's really interesting to see the different types of learning approaches. And it would be, I think, wise for us as a movement to think about who are these for, what's effective, what's really kind of having the impact we want. Because I do think that like prior moments in the environmental movement and social justice movement, any kind of movement, there's a real risk of burnout. So how are we connecting this to efforts in our place and not getting too lost in the global, learning at the global level, the cross-fertilization level, while still, Gary Snyder's quote sticks with me, digging into our piece of land. And that's a process. We need to walk and chew gum. We need to two-eyed seeing, whatever the metaphor you want to use. But being smart about it. And this is the tension in the movement, kind of letting 1,000 flowers bloom versus having kind of a cohesive approach, not necessarily one leader, but a conversation around where we're going together. And that's but that's the process we're in, the moment we're in. So
Thank you. Edward Muller has an important comment just around having a bit of a lens and focus, a nodal intervention, if you will. So he mentioned, trying to bring together multiple sectors in Costa Rica with his wonderful work around Costa Rica regenerativa. That got a little difficult, maybe just not so much, conflict or something, just complexity. You just sort of have an explosion of complexity as you bring together lots and lots of sectors on the landscape. So he mentioned focusing on, some very straightforward things like holistic grazing that could have some immediate impact on climate, biodiversity, rural livelihood, and then building out, from there. And I know, Lawrence, you're trying to start with some focal areas like around water and sort of build out around there. So this is another fascinating tension, starting with a few critical themes with the bioregional work and gradually working to say, this is an entire economic transformation. So over time, a bioregional economy is 100% of the economy, but maybe you start, with certain sectors and transformational areas. We have a few more minutes, and be wonderful if anyone wants to put up their hand at this point and ask a question or put some more questions into the comments. Take a moment and see if anybody has questions for us. Great. Well, then let me just conclude with one last important question, and then I'll turn it over to Kate to just wrap it up. I'm intrigued kind of with both of your efforts, Brandon and Lawrence, because you are engaging with major cities. So much of the bioregional movement has focused on rural areas, villages, towns, but you're both engaging with major areas like San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, in your case, Lawrence, and then Seattle, Vancouver, Portland. And, that trinity is really interesting. Those three cities do work a great deal collaboratively. They have some friendly competition to kind of defend that thin green line. I love that phrase. Brandon, so literally, can Cascadia sort of be this important kind of slowing effort to not have this crazy international trade, in fossil fuels. I mean, it's the 2020s. It's sheer insanity. So engaging with those three cities that all have fascinating histories of municipal and regional organizing, right? And of course, San Francisco with its various cultural movements. So just love to close this out with both of you could just come in briefly to say a bioregional movement also is engaging the full transect from the densest areas in the heart of a city to the most rugged wildlands. And what's amazing in both regions, that could literally be 50 miles. So San Francisco Bay area is literally a UNESCO biosphere reserve. Very few people know that. There are all kinds of critical areas of high biodiversity collectively forming a biosphere reserve. And it's a city region with 7 million people. So how can we play with this, transect and recognize that we're trying to work with watersheds, food sheds, fiber sheds, relocalize, and we need to deal with areas of very high density and have graceful transitions.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is about the carrying capacity, and cities already import so many materials and services.
Yeah.
And so we're not really thinking in our global just-in-time economy supply chain where those come from. But if we were to be more smart about it and targeted and develop some incentives, like say direct procurement dollars from governments or pension funds towards locally procured, regeneratively grown food, for example, this would be transformative, and it wouldn't be hard to do. And so, and California's, breadbasket, the breadbasket of the world, one of, is right by these massive metropolitan, dense urban corridors. And so the relationship between these two needs to be much stronger. So there's incredible potential there. And that to me is part of bioregionalism, is like, how are we more aware of material flows and starting to really understand where the opportunities are to change the global supply patterns. And yeah, that's so again, so much money is spent in cities. So let's try to redirect that as we can. But that's easier, maybe easier said than done.
Brandon.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think this question of what does it take to be regenerative is really interesting. And like Lawrence was just naming, I think biodiversity is really important. All of these other different layers and material flows and a bioregional economy means something, how do we make that ethical and local and where we're putting back more than we're taking each year. And I think that no matter what, whether it's easy or not, that conversation has to start with the cities and the population centers. And I actually think it gets a lot more interesting and creative when you do that as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. Just incredible presentations. So appreciate the conversation. So appreciate you, Isabel, for helping to initiate this whole series of conversations. And we'll continue weaving this. This will inform future courses and connections and movements over time. So thanks, everyone. And over to you, Kate, to close us out.
Hey, thank you so much, Stuart, Brandon, and Lawrence, for some really, really interesting presentations and a fantastic conversation. And thanks also to everyone who attended tonight. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to remind you all to please, please, please fill out our feedback and let us know what you thought of the conversation. And then just to remind you that our next conversation will be on the 2nd of July, and it will be hosted by UD Mandel of the Enliven Cooperative in Hawaii. And he'll be in conversation with Juan Manuel Crespo of the Amazon Sacred Headwaters and Noah Lincoln, who is an assistant professor of indigenous crops and cropping systems at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. So thanks again to all of you and have a great evening.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.